Hi, Shane.
Hey, how's it going?
Good, how are you?
Good to see you.
You too. Thanks so much for joining us
Yeah,
today.
thanks for having me.
Yeah. How's everything going? Have a good weekend?
Yeah, it was good. It was busy weekend, but it was a good one, getting some family stuff taken care of. So
Nice.
yeah. How
You
about you?
did you played with Dawn on Friday, is that right?
Yeah, Thursday night we did a gig
Nice.
at Nocturne, which was super fun. It was all Thelonious Monk music,
Nice. That's awesome.
and it was great. Yeah, it was really fun. Nice to play. The band was great. It was Drew Heller was on drums and Seth Lewis on bass, and we were all having a really great time playing together.
Nice. That sounds awesome. Do you have
Yeah.
anything else coming up soon that you're playing around Denver?
Actually, no, I was gonna do something at Dazzle, but decided to wait on it for a little bit. So,
Hmm.
yeah, actually, kind of nothing in the books right at the moment. Like we've been doing
Hmm.
some outdoor stuff through the summer, and then now it's kind of like time to figure out what to do as far as playing coming up in the fall.
Totally. Yeah,
Mhm.
I guess I was gonna ask like what you've been up to like during the pandemic and how it's affected your musical life and
Yeah, I mean, like all of us, it's been a pretty drastic effect on everything. I was lucky, like, to have an opportunity to come up in the beginning of the summer, end of the spring, to do some movie music, which
oh
was
cool.
a nice opportunity. It was something that came from a director producer that lives here and really enjoyed my band Kneebody. And the original idea was for us to uh, fly, be in the same town and go to a studio with this director and kind of play more like live to picture. And then that ended up getting kind of blown up with the pandemic. Like it wasn't going to make sense to try and fly and do that. All our plans got messed up. So we ended up doing it, but just three of us. It was Nate, our drummer slash bass player, like multi instrumentalist, and Ben, the saxophone player, and myself. We did the music on Logic in our various residences and shared files back and forth. So it was cool to do that. It was pretty much new process for me. Um,
Hmm.
I've played for TV and movie and commercial stuff over the years, but always just kind of as like the a session player, not really so much as the composer, and
Right.
kind of doing the lead stuff on that. So that was ended up being kind of good timing because it was a project that we could do safely from home, and it was kind of like a new exciting thing, and it helped me get going a little bit to try and get a little more skills on Logic and home recording. And we ended up coming up with a really cool sounding score. It doesn't sound anything like Kneebody. It's totally different sounding music. So that was good. That was like a way to be able to work, during it. But all of our like touring plans and stuff were canceled and are canceled indefinitely. It's like because
Hmm.
especially because we go usually internationally, like we'll be going more to Europe. We had some big in Mexico that got canceled, and so with all the travel restrictions now, we can't really do that stuff. So
Right.
Kneebody's just kind of on hold. Like we're kind of waiting to where it's like possible for us to travel a little more again
Hmm.
and do that. And then like individually, I've just been doing a few things. It's really just like as far as playing, it's mostly been a few like outdoor gigs and a couple indoor with safety protocol stuff. And
Hmm.
honestly, we've got like a bunch of like sort of family stuff. It's like I've been kind of taking care of other things that I haven't been able to do as well when I'm on tour. My mom's out of her house now in assisted living, and there's a house full of stuff that needs to get cleaned out and all that. So we've just been finally kind of catching up on that as like a big collection of stuff to deal with, and that's what we've been doing the last couple of weekends is like this estate sale stuff. And so yeah, so we mostly I've just been like, okay, music is kind of on pause. I'm like practicing and playing and but then kind of just trying to get some other stuff done
Hmm.
while the career is kind of slowed down for a bit.
Totally. That can
Mm.
be good sometimes, like a forced pause. I've noticed for me like the the pandemic has kind of helped me like remember what my priorities are as a musician and like I don't know if you've experienced anything like that or if it's kind of just been more of like a chill.
I guess for me, I mean, I'm in my mid 40s now, so I've been kind of going at it for a little while. I
Yeah.
started, playing gigs and stuff when I was pretty young. By the time I was first playing, I come from a musical family, so I've been doing gigs and stuff since I was like 11, 12 years old,
Hmm.
and I've been touring consistently since I was 20. So in one way, I kind of count that as a blessing because I've already gotten to do a lot, like more than I thought I'd ever be able to do in terms of opportunities in music. And so yeah, for me, it feels actually okay to have a pause and not feel like I have to try and force music to happen or reinvent myself right now. Probably
Mhm.
I should be doing it more probably, but it's more. It just feels like for me at this point in my adult life, it kind of works out that I can catch up on other things that I've been putting off and haven't had as much time to do, and just
Mhm.
kind of hopefully then when it's done, then be more ready to kind of like really get after it again. But I've been
Yeah.
thinking a lot too, like if
Oh,
your
we're
age and
frozen.
like kind of just getting going and like maybe just first starting to get out there and being able to tour and getting a band going, a new record out. I think it would be a lot harder in a way, like emotionally, just to feel that kind of growth and progress stunted at such like a new, exciting, point. Like I feel a little bit like an old man, like, all right, well, I'll just take, get back to it at some point here. But I've been thinking a lot about that, like for folks that are maybe just a little bit younger than me and how much this can throw a wrench in that important like development at the early part of a career and artistic development phase.
Hmm. Yeah, I think it's having everyone have to be more like creative about how they can still put out new things and maybe like live stream promote them, but
Mm-hmm.
it's just not the same. Do you remember the last like concert you went to like pre-pandemic or played like before lockdown?
Well, I remember one of the really fun ones I went to was this band Rubble Bucket,
Oh, I
played
love
at
Rumble Bucket.
the Bluebird. Yeah, I love that band. They sounded so good live. Like that was the last one for me. It was still a couple months before the pandemic. It's kind of before we started shutting down. But I mean, yeah, I'm missing that. Like that just being in a room together and to be able to dance around and not be worried about
Hmm.
health risks. And then I'm forgetting right now what was the last. Oh, Anybody did a tour pretty much like right before we did a tour in that was in like January. And we went all through like the Midwest, which is not usually when you want to tour the Midwest. You don't want to go to
Right.
like Minneapolis and Wisconsin, but we were like, that's what we did, and it actually ended up being cool. Like the weather didn't cancel any gigs, and it was our first kind of real tour as because we've always been a quintet with
Hmm.
Javi Rostigar on bass, and then he left the band last year, and so it was kind of our first tour doing this as the quartet where Nate plays bass and drums at the same time.
Hmm.
So we had a really fun tour. It was like kind of a new album that was out at that time, so that was kind of the
Hmm.
last more extended work thing I did before March and all the shutting down stuff.
Cool. Yeah. I don't even remember either. I had my recital and then suddenly it was all over. And I was like, at
Yeah,
least I got my recital in there.
I know,
But
and that feels like a
yeah.
long time ago now too. Even though it's been whatever kind of a 6 month mark, like it's just so much has been going on, and we're all going through so much with all of this that yeah, it makes the sense of time feel strange for me at least. But that feels like
Yeah.
in 10 years ago or something.
Totally.
But you're
What
right though. I mean, like a time like this, it's really cool to see how, and I feel like I'm watching it more than doing it. Really, honestly, for me at this point, like I was saying, but like watching how people as musicians and artists and just people in general like are inventive and ingenuitive, and like they can find ways to keep creating and keep projects going, and there's been so many really cool like inspiring things that people are getting to, and like what we're all learning during this time are like skills that we're going to use when it's done too, like being able to have better chops with like live streaming gigs and recording at home and promoting that stuff from that way, like that part is good. It's not fun while it's happening, but there will be benefits from what we have to do to deal with the situation. So I've been trying to kind
yeah.
of keep that in mind too, to keep a little more positive attitude about everything that's going on.
Yeah, I feel you. I'm like so technologically impaired. Like
Really?
figuring out how to record at home and stuff has been a trip, but
Yeah.
we're
Yeah, it
getting
kind of forces us to do it. I'm like that too. It's like I don't really gravitate towards technology or social media. Actually, it's something
there.
I
Hmm.
just kind of do out of necessity and like barely. So it's
Right.
yeah, kind of, so it can be good for folks like us, I guess, kind of push us to just deal with it a little more.
Totally.
Yeah.
I was gonna ask, was it a hard transition when you guys switched to having Nate play bass and drums, or was it pretty natural? Did you guys have to like reimagine a bunch of stuff?
Kind of both, because it's still the four of us left with all these years of playing and creating together. So there was, in some ways, a lot of continuity, and we had played like that before. That's a way we had been doing concerts when Kaveh couldn't make it. So we'd kind of been doing it, so we felt like, okay, this is a thing we can do, and it's amazing what he can do. So it felt kind of like a new exciting chapter that can be an extension of what we've done, but then also, yeah, we were like, let's just try and, we've been a band for a long time, and there's a big change. Like, let's try and figure out some new stuff to do. So, yeah, we kind of got back in the woodshed together a little bit and start to reimagine stuff. We, the Adam, the keyboard player who plays Rhodes usually, he got like a new synth that was sort of like a better like bass synth. Was doing a little bit of that sometimes during our gigs anyways. And then Ben and I, we got a couple synths, and we bring one on the road, just like a little rolling like synth that we can use to cover bass lines and stuff for a while. So we're like, okay, let's bring that in. And so, I mean, so that we can give Nate a break so he doesn't have to do two instruments all the time. Because that's, I still don't understand how he does that, but so just right there, like adding some new instruments into the mix. And then while we were on doing some of these gigs and touring, we did like, yeah, Midwest stuff and some California stuff before that. And for the first time in a while, we used to do this more on tour, where if we had a day off or we had extra hours or something, we would try and find a room and practice and rehearse. And then we kind of stopped doing that. And then now we're like, well, this is a good chance to do that again, because this is like this whole new thing. So we started doing more like just practicing together and playing. We've always tried to practice a lot of rhythm and feel stuff, and like we kind of get back to that, like let's get good at that and like focus on that again, especially since Kaveh is not here, and the way Nate, his feel is different than Kaveh. It was always kind of an interesting thing that they had to navigate over the years, and now when it's Nate just playing with Nate, it's just the Nate feel, from the drums. So yeah, we were kind of getting into practicing and creating and trying to like simplify the material and kind of, figure out a new direction that was, maybe less intricate than it had been lately. So that's kind of the path that we were starting on. And yeah, when we get back to it, it'll be interesting to see, where we pick it up.
Yeah. Do you have any, like, I think it's easier to like tell someone who's not maybe a drummer, like how to practice notes, but do you have tips for like young improvisers who want to work more on rhythm and like groove, like that you're talking about? Do you have any tips for that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, one thing is just to make that a basic part of your practice and realize that that's such a huge fundamental skill that you need to have to be a good musician. It's just like your rhythm has to be good, and so just being aware of that and thinking about it and being aware of it in your playing, first of all, is a big step, because a lot of times we, as like singers and horn players and everyone except drummers and maybe bass players, like a lot of times we will tend to focus more on like harmony, scales and repertoire, and like not always as much on rhythm. And so yeah, start just making that part of your practice. The thing that for me has helped me so much is just that I started playing drums when I was 13. I just really got into it. And so I would just sit down and play drums and just practice rhythm that way, just like trying to learn beats and then, kind of ask drummers questions. And I usually recommend that for my students. Like I think that all of us should play some piano and some drums, Yeah. And so just finding some time where you can just play rhythm like that. And like, if you have access to a drum set, then that's great. Just like carve out some time where you just sit down and start playing it. And just, if you can just start to get to the thing where you're, keeping the time going on the hi-hat and playing a beat and the other limbs, just doing that as a horn player, a singer, someone that doesn't play drums, the act of like maintaining steady pulse without getting to take any breaks, to be able to play, syncopation against the steady, pulse. Just getting that going where it feels good, well, it works wonders, for your time. Other thing, I like to practice with the metronomes, get practice with the metronome. And a good thing to practice is to have the metronome to start to like back it down so that it's not just clicking on like quarter notes all the time. But, so make sure, start to like reduce the pulse you're practicing to, like put it on half notes, put it on whole notes, put it on one click every 2 bars, so that you're doing more time where you're practicing and you're trying to play the time really steady in between these like less frequent markers of the steady tempo. That really helps your time even more than hearing a metronome click everything and like spell it out for you, because that forces you to be really steady for yourself. And that will really translate more into real life situations when you're playing with bands. Like if you can match a metronome like that. The other way to do it is like think of the metronome as being on like 2 and 4 instead of like 1 and 3 or 1, 2, 3, 4, or try and put it so that you're imagining that it's hitting like on an offbeat, like the and of 1 or and of 4 or something like that. So you get used to tracking beats that are some other place in the bar, not just a downbeat. That will really help to like even out your time and just kind of expand your rhythmic dexterity in a way, so that you can be tracking other rhythms that are, you know, a different part of the bar, you know, and be able to anchor on that. So it just expands your ability to hold pulse really steady and like mark something that's in kind of a weird spot. And the other thing is to like maybe, you know, try and put the metronome where it's like gonna click on every 3 beats or every 5 beats or something like that. So you have a pulse that's moving, and then just try and improvise and play a blues or something with that, like by yourself, and see if you can still kind of keep track of where, oh, that metronome's hitting, you know, okay, now it's on B2 in the next bar, and then B3 if like you have it grouped in 5s or something like that. So like little challenges like that are good. And you can do that while you're like practicing your scales or something, you know, just like put the metronome on 2 and 4 and just get used to practicing some scales while you're doing that, so you can combine your rhythm practice with other stuff that you're working on in terms of your, like, as brass player, like your chop maintenance, or like refreshing your scales or arpeggios or learning a song, you know. So those are a handful of things that I do and put in my teaching.
I've never done the metronome on like odd, like switching up thing, but I'm gonna do
Yeah.
that thing.
Yeah, it's really valuable.
Oh,
Like, I know
Colin
more people.
Stranahan says Shane Endsley is one of my favorite musicians in the world and drummers from
Oh
Colin.
man,
You see
that's
that in
nice.
the
What's up,
chat?
Colin? I didn't even check that. That's cool. Right on. That's nice. Colin jumped in. Well, that dude's super bad, so that's nice to hear. Denver
I'm
strong.
gonna be interviewing Colin on the 18th. Oh, sorry, I
Oh
feel like
yeah.
I keep cutting you off.
No, not at all.
Yeah,
It's just,
he's
just
doing the
giving
one on
Colin
the
a roll.
18th.
Yeah. Oh, right on. Right. Yeah. Well, we missed him around here. I wish that dude would move back. Come back to Denver, Colin. Get out of New York, man.
And then for anyone just joining us, this is a CCJA. It's called CCJA Sundays. We're the Colorado Conservatory for the Jazz Arts, if you don't know. And we're doing a new series called CCJA Sundays, where I'll be interviewing musicians. We'll have master classes, and we have a new book club. So thank you guys for joining us. If anyone has questions, you can drop them in the comments at any point, and we'll make sure we get to them. But yeah, I feel like I cut you off like so bad.
Not at
At
all.
some point.
Not at all.
Okay.
Yeah.
All this rhythmic talk has kind of like made me wonder for your compositional style, like, do you approach things, do you have like a usual go-to way that you approach things, like harmony first, melody first, rhythm? Does it kind of vary based on what the setting is? Like, I guess that's super broad, but
No, that's a good
anything.
question though. Like, I tend to write at the piano, and I feel like maybe a majority of my kind of like ideas that'll come in terms of like some initial inspiration where I'm like, oh, this is cool, I might like to make a tune out of it, will be either some kind of bass line or like a first kind of chord progression. And then I'll try and build out from there. But I think it's really valuable to try and start, like as a compositional exercise at least, to try and start songs from different instruments or from different parts of the music. You know, so sometimes I'll try and come up with something on the drums first. Like, let me come up with something that's like a beat that would be cool, that would feel good, you know, that I could like start writing to. Let me get the melody first. I used to do this more often, where I would kind of get an idea for like a structure that I think would be cool. Like, you know, for instance, say like what about like a song that starts where it's just, you know, this one bass line over and over with these like harmony that move against it, and then the harmony gets faster until it releases to another section where it like changes key and the tempo is faster, and then it comes back to that first bass line, but it's going to be in that new tempo with a melody that finally comes in. Something I would get like some idea like that, like a contour, and then try and write and fill that in. And that was usually coming from a place of like imagining myself as a listener, like what would be like an interesting journey for me if I was watching a band play this live, and like what kind of unexpected twists and turns could happen in a composition that aren't like a standard kind of here's the head and a bunch of solos and then another head out, or something like that. Trying to think of like interesting variations on form. And then I think it's trying to start from different places, like start with the melody first, start with the harmony first. Like even just do that as an exercise where it's like, if you do that more often, where it's like, okay, I'm gonna today get 16 measures of music written in 20 minutes. I'm gonna make a bass line first, and then I'm gonna fill in harmony and melody and rhythm. That's another thing about, like, I really recommend this too. Like, I see a lot of times composers will not really envision the rhythmic part of their piece, and like, I don't know if Colin's on, I bet he runs into this all the time, where it's like someone has taking all this time and thought about all these chords, all this melody, all this form, and then the drummer's like, well, what should I do? And they're like, oh, I don't know, something. Could you figure something out? And sometimes that's great. If you have a great drummer that's like, creative and skilled and experienced, then a lot of times that's better. Just like let them hear it and create something. But it's important to, like, I think, imagine that rhythmic part. Like, can you sing like sort of like a feel that, lets us know what like the eighth notes feel like, or can you sing kind of a beat, or can you kind of body percussion, like tap out a beat, or do you play some drums? Can you sit down to, like, if the drummer's like, can you play it for me? Like, could you sit down, like play a little something? Or like having references, like the referencing thing can be a little dicey, because not everyone wants to be told like, hey, can you play this kind of like a Philly Joe thing or whatever, and they're kind of like, but it can help though, like just like some like a reference from like an album or a player. It's kind of like an Elvin thing, then it's like, oh, okay, that makes sense. It can give someone a picture, like a drummer can like, oh, I understand what you're saying, so it's good to just consider that as composers, like even if you're not starting from that in your composition, but before you bring it into a band, take a minute and think about, when the drummer asks me, what am I supposed to do? What are you gonna tell them? Get a lot of different ways to do it, but just if you take some time to think about that, it's good.
Totally. I'm like so guilty of that in like big band writing and stuff. Like, I do the whole thing and then I'm like, oh, drum part.
Dude, everybody does. I'm telling you, everybody. It's very few people that really have something like fleshed out for the rhythm part. It's like something they leave up to the drummer to create. And like I said, a lot of times that's good. Like if you've got a great drummer, then maybe you don't want to tell them too much, because they're going to come up with cool stuff that you wouldn't, just let them do their thing. But some people like direction. Some people really like, they want to like understand what the composer's intent is, even if they're great drummers. And then sometimes people are just like less experienced, and they're like, just help me. You need to help them know basically what to do. Like what things are we going to be hitting when, what kind of sound are we getting? So I don't know, if when you're listening to music now, just like focus on the drums, like listen to what the drummer is doing and be like, oh yeah, so that's kind of like, that's what John Bonham sounds like, and then you can kind of have that in your head as like something that you can share with the drummer. Yeah, could it be kind of like a Keith Moon thing, like open up on the toms and I don't know, whatever, like something you can like communicate, even if it's like general, it can just help point someone in the right direction to understand what the vibe of the song could be.
Totally.
Should be, yeah.
Would you say you write more like kind of generally, like, I don't know how to phrase this, like do you write for specific people or specific projects in mind, or when you write, do you kind of start just with a blank slate and then see where maybe it goes?
Yeah, I do both of those things. Like certainly when it's like writing for like Knee Body or something where I know the people in the band, then I'm like really thinking like what we do and what the individuals do and our tendencies, our strengths and weaknesses, to set up like sort of tones and things that I know we can get to. And that's something we always talk a lot about with like Duke Ellington was one of the real masters of that, right? That he really wrote music for the players and like would write things around what they could naturally do and like write to their strength. And I think that's hugely inspiring and like important when you're working with a band. But I also, especially when I was living in New York, it was just like, I didn't have like a regular band there. And I'm, even when you're playing in projects, I'm playing with people, it's like, oh yeah, we're a band. I mean, everyone has a band, but you probably, except for those few people, like you probably just do gigs with that band like a few times a year, and you're mostly kind of like circling around to different, gigs all the time. So I definitely wrote a bunch of music there everything is just like on 1 or 2 pages. and trying to keep it like not too complex and kind of open-ended, you know. So it's just like basically we can like look at this song and like, you know, good players can like digest it pretty quickly. It's like, oh yeah, it goes like this and repeat here, and then this is kind of the vibe, and then we can just play it. Because usually there it's like you would have, you know, one rehearsal for about 2 hours, and then you go play a concert, and a lot of times that concert would be 2 sets, and you're trying not to repeat music, you know, so you just don't have a lot of time to put stuff together. So I definitely learned to try and write that way, where it's like, you know, something that anybody could play and it could sound totally different, and not have like a bunch of like preconceived ideas about what the drums are supposed to do, or like exactly what the, you know, how the voicings need to fit with the harmony, where it's just like, here's a tune, let's all
Mm-hmm.
play it, do what you want to do, you know, and you know, and that's, so it's good to have both. And it's something to keep in mind, because not just in New York, like kind of everywhere, you know, in the jazz world, like a lot of times we put bands together to do a concert or a recording or something like that, and it's not about like you have a long time to like develop stuff and talk about these details and like try
Right.
things over and over again. You know, you probably have limited time to develop that stuff, so it's good as a composer, as a band leader, to have material that's like, that's easy basically, so that the players can relax and play with each other. And that's what makes the music really exciting anyways, you know. You know, if you're just like struggling to kind of make it through all these like intense arrangements that you only had a chance to run through once in a rehearsal last week, your brain is, and your headspace is not very freed up to like just be improvising and following a thread and like kind of following energy. And like you're really just trying to be like, oh, is this section 4 times or 2 times, and who's cueing
Right.
it? We go to the, is it DS now? Like all that stuff, you know, you get tied up in that. So
Mm-hmm.
it's good to like, you know, to have stuff writing that's like pared down and simple, and people can just get the idea, and there's not a whole lot of like roadmap like plans that people have to deal with. So you can just
Mm-hmm.
start playing and just have fun, you know. And it actually helps you relax as a band leader, and helps you as a composer to be like, most of us can trim the fat on what we write, you know. Like usually we try and put too many ideas in one thing. I definitely do. So
Mm-hmm.
it's like trying to learn how to just like just stick with the initial idea and let the improvised music. So then let the improvisers, you know, take it from there and just see where it goes. But if
Yeah.
you got it all bogged in, you know, where it's like, yeah, but we got to get to page 3. There's this interlude, and then it's the drum solo for 3-bar phrases, and then the bass trades with 2 bars. If it's all that stuff, like you usually need more time to pull that off. So a lot of times you got to just be a little strategic about how much you want to try and squeeze into one concert or one composition,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Yeah. I totally agree. I've run into that a lot in my early years as a composer.
Yeah. Well, it's hard, right? Because you know, you have so many ideas, and you're like, the vision can be really big, really quick, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying like don't do that. It's just like, just be careful about trying to do that when you just have one gig that you're going to do with these people. And, you know, it's just like, you know, how much can you get out of it, and what kind of experience do you want to have, and what kind of experience do you want the players to have, and think about how that's going to reflect to the audience. You know, if everyone's like stressed out, staring at a music stand, barely looking up, then you're not going to connect with the audience very well, and you're not going to connect with each other that great. It's going to be like in the trenches getting through it. But when it's like your record and like something that you're like thinking about, then like, yeah, like try and, you know, go ahead and like push it and try and really get all your ideas across and experiment and just like, you know, try it, you know. So
Mm-hmm.
that's how I think about it anyways. You know, kind of pick your times to really dig in and like, you know, really go after the more intricate stuff, I guess, you know.
Totally. Looks
Mm-hmm.
like Paul just hopped on. Hey, Paul.
Paul Romain.
We've got some questions coming in, so maybe I'll read some of those.
Okay.
Um, what do you take seriously regarding music, and what do you think shouldn't be taken so seriously?
Oh, um, that's an interesting question. No one's ever quite asked that before. Well, for me, I guess my answer would be like, I'm always trying to find like a balance between those two things, because music for me is the most important thing in my life. It's been so much part of my identity, and it's like a bedrock of my whole existence, you know. So it's very serious, you know, for me. And I grew up in a family of musicians where it was like practicing and like perfecting, you know, trying to like really hone your craft, and like to take that really seriously, and like have high standards for, you know, how well you play, and how you approach the music. um, I really do, you know, take that seriously, and that's something that's very kind of sacred for me. But also, it's really easy to take ourselves too seriously, and I think, you know, music is better when it's fun. So even when things are like, you know, serious, I like to just still like not take it too seriously, and like don't forget to laugh, and don't, you know, get too wrapped up in, you know, the minutiae around just like being a musician. You know, there's going to be good gigs and there's going to be bad gigs. You know, some of your tunes are going to sound great and some aren't. And one night you'll play really well and the next night you won't. Like, um, you know, I'm trying to learn how to not take that stuff too seriously. It's like, oh man, I really blew that one. I was embarrassing, sounded stupid. Oh well, you know, that's pretty funny, you know. And on the same thing on the days when it's like, yeah, like don't get wrapped up. Be like, man, I'm so good at this, or this is the most important thing. You know, it's just, I feel like it's like that balance of like, this stuff is really important. Music is so important. Um, it's such an important integral part of life on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
And also there's a lot of other stuff going on the planet too. So like, don't, you know, like, you know, be too precious about it in a way. You know, like for me, I think about too, just, one thing I like to remember is that, you know, when things aren't going well and like some concert or recording or something, some professional thing or working thing is like not going well, it's kind of a disaster, go ahead and enjoy that, because those are usually the best stories to tell afterwards. You know, it's like, this was hilarious, you won't believe, you know, like, I mean, that's the ones I remember, those gigs I remember more. It's like, I remember those gigs more than the ones where we like show up on time and sound check with no problems and play really great. You know, that's always like,
Uh-huh.
you know, but the one where it's like, dude, the bass player missed the plane, and then we, you know, I mean, we have some, like one time we were on one of the early knee body tours. We, it was like one of our first ones. We were driving around the East Coast. We played a gig in Philadelphia at this really divey, really like filled with hepatitis type of rock club. And there was like three people there, and it was cold outside, and it was just, and they didn't care that we were there. It was just a place, they were just like, whatever, you know, like we're in like the other room, and we're just like, oh man. And then they're like, yeah, you guys can stay here. They had like an apartment above the club. They're like, yeah, the bands can stay here. And it was like the grungiest, nastiest. I was like, even at that young age, we're like, oh god, man, like we have to just get a hotel, like we'll just, it doesn't matter, you know. But one of the guys that came to the gig was a friend of ours from school, from music school, and we were telling him about it. He's like, man, why don't you come stay with me? I'm staying, you know, I'm staying in my parents' house outside of town in the country. They're not even here, and it's a big house. We have extra rooms and couches. So then we were like, oh, he's saving us, and we left our like terrible gig, and we went and stayed out at his beautiful place, and woke up in the morning, and we had to drive to Rochester the next day for a gig, so we had kind of a long, you know, drive. And so things were working out, looking up, and we're finishing breakfast, and he's got a dog, and we're throwing the ball for the dog, and like, thank you, man, this was like so nice. And kind of loading up the minivan. We always drive a minivan around, you know, putting suitcases in the back. And then we're like, okay, man, we're gonna get going, waving goodbye. And then so we start driving. We're on the country, so it's like dirt roads and grass, and it was kind of muddy. And we're starting to like back the car around to get out, and we're kind of driving over something. It's like, and we're like, come on. And everyone's like kind of directing traffic, like, no, you're hitting a rock or something. And finally we get pulled around, we start driving back, and one of us looks back, and we'd actually been driving back and forth over Kave's face for the last like minute. So, and we're just like, oh my god. So we stop, we get out, we come over, Kave gets out. It was muddy right there, and so we walked up to the case, and it was like made this sound when you lift it. It was like pulled it out of this mud, you know. And he opened it up, and the strings were like all over the place. And you know, it's like if your instrument gets damaged, like how bad that hurts, you know. So Kave was just like crushed, and we all felt horrible because we were like, who left the bass out, you know. And we were just like driving in silence for like an hour and a half, and then we got to halfway to Rochester, where most of us went to school. We're like calling ahead to the music store. We're like, hey, can we rent a bass for tonight? We're a band coming from out of town. And as soon as they heard that, they were like, sure, $500 a night. Like they thought we were some like big time band or something. And we're like, dude, our gig pays $200. So why are we? So we finally got a friend like from school, like loaned us the bass. And we got there, and it made it work. And we played the gig, and our friends came. and we were finally at the end, and then like the club manager calls us over, and she's like, let me talk to you for a minute. And she was like, this is not nearly the crowd we were expecting. You know, I'm going to have to cut your pay down. And if I remember right, the gig was $200, you know, for a band coming from out of town. And she's like, I'm going to pay you $100. And we were just like, after all this stuff, we were like, no, you can't do this to us, you know. And whatever, we sobbed, and she paid us anyways. But you know, just like that, as that was happening, it was just like torturous kind of. It was just like, man, everything is going wrong. We ran over the bass. They're ripping us off. Nobody came to our gigs. And it's now, for me, it's hilarious. Like, I love, you know, it's just like, it's so funny to me, like those things. And they do kind of build a character. They add like the color of our lives in this music, you know. So, you know, don't take it too seriously. When stuff's really going wrong, it's like, hey, no one's dying here. You know, this is like a weird experience. Just like, if you can kind of have a little awareness of all that's happening, it's good. Because like when you're young, like especially, like you can take that stuff to heart and feel so insulted and like the injustice of it all. And it is like, that lady was so rude, trying to like rip us off after we went to all that trouble to get that. You know, it's like we were so mad at the time, but also it's just so silly. You know, it's like, what is this life? What are we doing out here? You know, so it's good to keep that in mind. We've had some funny ones like that. One time we left the minivan open as we were leaving San Francisco, and we just dropped all the gear, like fell out the back of the car. And we didn't know. And somebody pulled up next to us at a stoplight, and they like pulled out the symbol bag. They're like, hey, this is yours. You're dropping all your stuff on the freeway. We're like, oh. We spun around, found everything except I had this little suitcase with my like effects pedals in it, and there was like a homeless guy was like walking off with it, and I ran over. I was like, hey man. He's like, oh, sorry. You know, I always wonder what that guy would have done if he got back to his like spot and then like opened up his new ring modulator and distortion pedal. Like, I don't know.
That's
And yeah, so
wild.
that's what I think about that. You know, be serious, like really work on it, and then be ready for stuff to go wrong and be silly, and then enjoy a good laugh, and it's all part of the experience. You know?
Totally. Cool. I guess we'll just keep going with the questions. I love those stories so much.
Yeah.
Here's one. How have you developed your unique intervallic and harmonic part of your playing? What kind of stuff do you work on, and who would you transcribe for that kind of stuff?
Well, that's cool. Yeah, I always have been interested in like kind of sort of wider intervals, and you know, and I really was definitely a big Woody Shaw fan at a certain point, and that's like something I think was pretty unique about his playing. So that's certainly somebody that is great to transcribe. Probably need to slow it down a little bit or whatever to get it, but like he had such an interesting harmonic brain. And same with Eric Dolphy. I really appreciated him so much. And then also, when I was young, I started playing with Steve Coleman, the alto saxophonist and composer, and he's a genius, you know, and like a lot of the way he wrote harmony in his music at that time was like set theory. It was like, instead of chord changes, it'd be like for these bars or whatever, there'd just be like 1, 3, 7, 9, 15, and that was like all intervals, you know, like half step, minor third, perfect fourth, yada yada. So then it was like, oh, okay, so that's like, you know, figuring that out. But I was always really interested in that, and I liked the sound of that. And you know, like a good way to practice that is just like start doing it with like a major scale. Can you hear that? Can you hear the piano?
Yeah.
So even with that, just like practicing it in like fourths. You know, like get those, and then just start to move those around. My piano playing is bad. You know, you can just start to like move stuff around, then practice like with fifths. Like I like to play with that a little bit, just like improvisers playing like only like intervals. Like here, let me grab my horn for a second. So let's see, like, because then you can kind of like build like a sound if you just kind of deal with like a set of intervals like that. Like these valves are working. Is that super distorted or not too bad?
Not too bad.
Okay. Yeah. So like for instance, for a while I was really practicing this thing where I go and use only mostly only minor thirds, and just try and move them around in kind of unexpected ways. So trying to like not do too many like whole like diminished, seventh chord kind of motions, but so like in slow motion, like if doing like just these minor thirds basically. And then and then kind of getting better at running through those faster, and then it makes like an interesting, I think, like a little bit of something a little bit like unique as a sound you can play with. So it's like, something to kind of anchor on and have like a way of like playing, with the sort of atonality or chromaticism, but there's like a little something that kind of links it together so that it has like a little bit of a unifying sort of sound to it. So, I mean, I think that stuff's kind of interesting, but, and if you just start playing your scales and like break them up more into these different sort of intervals or like patterns, like there's a lot of, there's probably too much like practicing of like patterns and stuff in like jazz education, but, just like with your major scale, like pick a pattern that's like, so maybe I'll play a third and then a fifth, and then walk up your scale like that. And then maybe you can use that as something that you build melodies just from that kind of pattern. So you can run through that one idea and just kind of start to move it around and like and play with it that way. And that's even before you get to like, sort of inverting it and, varying on it like that. But I think stuff like that, just like make a little quick 3-4 note pattern or like shape, and then play that through a whole scale. And then usually you'll find one that'll sound cool. Like, oh, when I did that from the seventh, it made this tritone and then something that sounded really cool. And then it's like, oh, maybe I'll try and do that as a lick, and I'll transpose that like chromatically and build some melody out of that. And you can develop a more kind of personal vocabulary that way. And a lot of times those lead to like tunes. It's like, oh, that's the beginning of a melody. I never would have thought of that. That's got a thing to it,
Yeah, that's nice to hear. Like I've been needing something to get me out of my compositional rut, so I'm gonna go do that.
Oh, there, okay.
Yeah, I need little things like that to get me going.
I know. Right.
I think there's one more that was submitted. What did you take away playing in Landy's band as a kid?
Oh, yeah, Art Landy. I mean, for those, Art Landy's one of our like musical treasures here in Colorado. Wonderful pianist, also drummer, incredible composer, and an amazing teacher. So yeah, I think about him all the time. Like some of the things I learned from him. And like I met him when I was first like going to CU, and it was like a freshman and sophomore in college. And I finally went over and like took a couple lessons from him, and then pretty quickly like started playing in his band. He had this Russian Dragon band, was like one of the main groups that he had working at that time, and or whatever, recording stuff. And I think the things, and so many of us here in Colorado have like studied with art or worked with art, and like he has a big impression on a lot of us, and I think what a lot of us take from him is that, first of all, that idea of like really this broad sense of possibilities in the music and like big changes that can happen in the music. A lot of times as musicians, we have a tendency to be like, okay, you start the song and you just play the song. This is what this song sounds like. And you kind of just stay right in that zone. But really, I mean, it's like, there's nothing to stop us from completely changing and doing totally different things. So like, if there's a moment where all of a sudden the two stops and gets really slow and it's just the trumpet player and the bass player playing something completely different, like don't freak out about that. Just let that happen. and you can always, you know, find your way back to the material when you need it. So don't be afraid to like totally jump off the path and just explore some new direction when it happens. And in fact, you have to be ready to notice those moments when they happen and be like, oh, this is a moment when we change, and then be like, let's change, like just fully go for it, you know. So that as like is a big sort of concept that I think about a lot with him. The other one, like other like specific thing that I think about and I teach, I totally steal and put in my teaching all the time is as far as like getting better at playing changes, that he had this thing he taught about where you would just play like a line, like just an ascending like scale, you know, going up and down over a song, you know. So like if you're practicing a tune, and it's good to do that stuff at the piano, like you pick like a starting note and like you play the changes, and you just keep going up to the next closest note, and maybe you're going up in half notes or whole notes, you know, over a song. And you have to make a move. You have to go to the next note, and you go up until you get to sort of the top of your range, and then you kind of come back down. You keep kind of going through like that at an even rhythm, and then that forces you. You end up always in a place where you're like, I have to choose a note for this chord, and I have to choose something that's within a half step or a whole step, and I would normally never make this like choice in the course of our own improvising, because it's just something that, you know, for instance, like maybe like so many times you see a minor chord and a lot of us don't know right away, like what is the sixth note of that scale for that chord? Is it like a minor sixth or a major sixth? Usually it doesn't say in the chord symbol. So a lot of times you find yourself in that corner through that exercise where it's like, okay, now you have to make that choice and play that note and hear what it sounds like. And sometimes there's kind of a clear right and wrong about what fits the scale or the key. And sometimes it's a matter of just your personal taste of like, oh, I like the way that sounds on it. But that's been like a really, just like valuable thing of just practicing through changes that way. And also helps build our sense, like he pointed out, like we can think about building like contour where like a line like can really kind of go up and down in like longer shapes, you know, so we're not always kind of like wiggling around through, you know, our changes and stuff, but like you can have these like longer shapes that really take place over a long time. And that's kind of a cool thing to practice also.
Sweet. We have like one more question and then maybe a little closing, and we'll call it after that. Does that sound good? All right, sweet. How do you allude to tradition without being bland / hindering expressing present life? And how does the tradition inform your playing when you're not playing like a bird lick?
Oh, wait, could you repeat that one? Just my phone was cutting out a little bit on that.
Yeah. How do you allude to tradition without it being bland and hindering the expression of present life? And how does tradition inform your playing, even if you're not just like verbatim playing like a bird lick?
Right. Oh, yeah, that's a good question. I mean, that's something we wrestle with a lot in, you know, like coming from like a jazz place when we're learning music. And that thing about the tradition can carry like a pretty heavy weight to it, you know. And yeah, it's a tricky balance. Like for me, when I like first got into this music, I really was just really into like some of the classic stuff. Like I love Lee Morgan, I love the Jazz Messengers, I love Horace Silver's quintet records, I love Eric Dolphy, you know, quintet with Booker Little. I got into that right away. These Freddie Hubbard, you know, I was like those are like the folks I really got into, and Coltrane, Joe Henderson, like stuff that I think is like a meat and potatoes of that like middle, you know, where we're at, like a middle period of jazz or something. But I always wanted to sound like myself. Like for me, that was something like kind of early on that I would like look for. So for me, a lot of times it would be looking for some sort of variation I can make on the sort of traditional approach, whatever that kind of is in that moment. It take, you know, different shapes, I guess. But I don't know, like say, for instance, a lot of time we do this thing where like say like there's a 5 chord, and then a lot of times for that 5 chord, play, you know, just the dominant chord, or maybe you play like sort of like an altered. A lot of times you think about that as like a tritone substitution. So if that's like a G7, maybe you play like a D flat 7 instead. it's like, well, what if you, instead of approaching from the half step above, like, what if you came from the half step below? Like, what would that, is that any different, you know, like, or what about a whole step below or something like that, and figure out some other way of just kind of entering into like a resolution in a different way. You know, a little different, you know, or maybe like, oh, what if I did it instead of like, maybe I'll do like A major instead of D flat or something like that. You know, it gets a different sound, but I'm still kind of dealing with the thing like, here's this dominant chord. This is a lot of time where we want to put in, you know, some kind of like dissonance. What if I found like a different sound I could put on it, you know? Or what about instead of like putting the dissonance on the dominant chord, then you put it on the resolution. Resolve later, you know? It's like, why don't, just looking for ways like that. Well, how can I adjust this rule to make it something that's like related, but it's a little bit different, you know? So for me, it's been a lot of times like a sort of a game thing like that. Like, how can I take this rule and kind of twist it a little bit and make it not what we normally do, but relatable enough that I could like play it on a gig and it won't, you know, it can just kind of fit into the normal, you know, way that we play jazz music and stuff. So yeah, a lot of times it's like a game like that. Like, what's some like little thing, you know, that I can do. And I mean, I don't know, for me, like, trying to play stuff that, like, you know, for playing traditional jazz, like trying to play stuff and just still swing really hard and have my, like, you know, my rhythm feel good, but then play all kinds of, you know, weird notes and play different, you know, chords on top of other chords and make that sound like cool. Like, I don't know. I like to try and do that stuff over, even like kind of blending like traditional things, like, you know, Ornette Coleman's tradition dealt so much with like a free form kind of harmony, harmonics you call it a lot, which is, you know, that has like a lot of things behind it, what else it can mean too. But for one thing, it's like they would kind of freely kind of improvise and change keys and let keys lay against each other and like let that sound happen. So even just something like that, like getting used to like doing some of that stuff where you just go ahead and like play a different key on top of one and like let it sit there for a little bit. So if I'm like playing in C and I just go ahead and play an E major on top of it for a while, like pull out, resolve sometime in a clean moment. Like, just take one idea like that. I'm just going to run this one scale over all these changes and just let it sound weird and evolve like that. Stick with it long enough, and then, you know, come out and resolve. Kind of those ways where like you're not ignoring what's happening. I'm not ignoring the harmony or anything like that, but I'm just like going ahead and like break this rule for a little bit. See what happens. See how the band reacts and see what we do. And then always find our way back when we feel like it. So I think sometimes it's that, like, you know, don't be afraid to break the rules. Like, it's really important to learn those things and learn skills and the way that, you know, chord scale relationships and standard repertoire, like learn all that stuff, because you get so much from it. But then, yeah, definitely be looking for like your own way to do it, because as far as us like making it as musicians, and like the more you can stamp out your own personality and be something special and different, the more likely you are to be, you know, successful in a certain way, especially as more like a jazz artist or improvised music sort of artist. You know, that's the most important thing, that you're not just like a trumpet player, like you're somebody that has this something that they do, you know, and like, you know, start finding that from the beginning, even when you're learning the traditional stuff.
Yeah, I have so much cool stuff I'm gonna go practice. This has been a very inspiring conversation for me, so thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks for the folks that joined us. That was really a pleasure.
Yeah, do you have any last comments or thoughts or anything you want to talk about coming up, or feeling good?
I mean, just everybody, you know, what I say is like, I don't know how everyone's doing with watching there's so much kind of turmoil and crazy stuff going on in the world. And what I say is like, leave is like, let's find a good balance of like facing up to what we got to face up to, and the reality of like things that are not good in our country. And but also just kind of stay strong and positive. That means, you know, that doesn't mean you're going to feel good and strong and positive every moment, but know that like it's kind of on us to like kind of rally right now and move things the right direction. And don't be afraid to take breaks when you need it. It's okay to feel sad, okay to feel mad, but then like try and keep things, you know, on the page of like, well, what can we do? What can I do to make things better? And for sure, anyone who's on here that's old enough to vote needs to for sure vote this election. And if you feel like you can do some phone banking or something like that, just to get out and help and just try and like really make a really solid effort to start changing things a different direction, in which we just need a change of government to do that. So like, let's just like, that's part of our job right now. So while we're practicing music and chords and scales, like don't forget to just really, go ahead and get involved in that, and not just like posting about it on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or anything like that, but like, find some like tangible action that you can take that might make a difference. And if we all do that, then we're going to be good.
Totally. I love leaving it on that note. Thank you for saying that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Well, thanks again, Shane, and stay safe, and hope everything's good, and hope to see you in person at some point in the future.
Yeah, same to you and same to everybody. Thanks, Camilla. Nice work on this.
Thanks. See ya.
All right. See you around.